The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and wondered what was out there. They dreamed of meeting other beings, of sharing knowledge, of becoming part of something greater than themselves. When humanity finally built ships that could travel between stars, they sent messages of peace to every corner of the galaxy. They wanted friends. They wanted to learn. They wanted to belong. The Galactic Council answered their call. The Council was ancient. They had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years. 12 species sat on the Council, and they controlled everything. They decided which races could travel the stars. They decided who lived and who died. They had crushed hundreds of species before, and they believed they would rule forever. When humanity's message reached them, the Council gathered to discuss these new beings. They watched Earth from far away. They studied humans carefully. They saw how fast humans multiplied. They saw how quickly humans learned new things. They saw how fiercely humans fought their own wars, and they became afraid. Admiral Laura Bennett was 42 years old when the Council ships arrived. She had spent her whole life in space. She had helped build humanity's first starships. She had led the mission that established the colony on Mars. She believed with all her heart that meeting alien life would be the greatest moment in human history. She stood on the bridge of the starship Vanguard and watched the Council fleet emerge from faster-than-light travel. There were hundreds of ships, all gleaming silver and gold. They were beautiful. Laura felt tears in her eyes as she looked at them. "Open a channel," she said to her communications officer. "Send our greeting message. Tell them we come in peace." The message went out. Laura waited for a response. She imagined the celebrations that would happen on Earth. She imagined children looking up at the sky, knowing they were not alone. She imagined a future where humans and aliens worked together, explored together, dreamed together. The Council ships opened fire. The first blast hit the Vanguard shields and sent everyone flying across the bridge. Laura grabbed the railing and pulled herself up. Alarms screamed all around her. Red lights flashed everywhere. "What's happening?" She shouted. Her tactical officer, a young man named Daniel Price, stared at his screen with wide eyes. "They're attacking the orbital stations," he said. His voice was shaking. "All of them. They're attacking Earth." Laura watched in horror as the Council fleet spread out and began their assault. The orbital stations had no weapons. They were research centers, communication hubs, and space docks. They held scientists, engineers, families. Children. The stations exploded one by one. Balls of fire bloomed in the darkness of space and then went dark. Each explosion was 1,000 lives, ended in an instant. "Get us out of here," Laura ordered. "We have to warn the colonies." The Vanguard turned and ran. Behind them, the Council fleet descended on Earth like wolves on a wounded deer. The attack lasted 3 days. The Council ships bombed every major city. They destroyed the power grids, the water treatment plants, the hospitals. They killed without mercy, without pause, without any attempt to communicate. They had come to end humanity, and they did their job with cold efficiency. 3 billion people died in those 3 days. Daniel Price led the evacuation efforts. He was only 28 years old, but he had a gift for staying calm when everything was falling apart. He organized the escape ships. He plotted courses to the hidden colonies that the Council didn't know about. He saved millions of lives while his home world burned. On the last day, Daniel received a transmission from the Council flagship. An alien face appeared on his screen. It had gray skin, 4 eyes, and a mouth full of small, sharp teeth. This was Counselor Dexari, the leader of the attack. "You should not have reached for the stars," Dexari said. His voice was calm and pleasant, as if he was discussing the weather. "Your species grows too fast. You adapt too quickly. You fight too well. In 100 years, you would challenge us. In 200, you might defeat us. We cannot allow this." Daniel stared at the alien. Behind him, he could hear the screams of people trying to board the escape ships. He could smell smoke and blood. "We came in peace," Daniel said. "We only wanted to be friends." The Xari made a sound that might have been laughter. "Peace is for equals. You are not our equals. You are a threat, and threats must be eliminated." The transmission ended. Daniel turned back to his work. There would be time for anger later. There would be time for grief. Right now, he had to save as many people as he could. The escape ships fled to the outer rim of the galaxy, to small colonies that humanity had built in secret. These colonies were hidden in asteroid fields, on frozen moons, in places where no one would think to look. The Council fleet followed for a while, destroying any ship they could catch. But eventually, they stopped. They believed they had won. Admiral Laura Bennett survived. She gathered the remaining ships and led them to a frozen world called Haven 7. It was a terrible place, with temperatures that could kill a person in minutes and storms that lasted for months. But it was hidden. It was safe. And it was a place where humanity could rebuild. On the first night, Laura stood outside the emergency shelters and looked up at the stars. The same stars that had once filled her with wonder now filled her with something else. Something cold and hard and patient. Around her, survivors huddled together for warmth. Children cried for parents who would never come. Old people stared at nothing, their minds broken by what they had seen. Young people like Daniel Price worked without rest, trying to build a future from the ashes of the past. Laura made a promise that night. She made it silently, in her heart, where no one could hear. She promised the 3 billion dead that their murderers would pay. She promised that humanity would survive. She promised that one day, the Council would learn what it meant to make an enemy of the human race. The Council had tried to end humanity. They had failed. And that failure would cost them everything. 20 years of silence began. 20 years of building. 20 years of waiting. And then humanity would return. Haven 7 was a world of ice and darkness. The sun was small and distant, giving barely enough light to see. Temperatures dropped so low that metal became brittle and shattered. Storms of frozen chemicals swept across the surface, destroying anything caught in their path. No sane species would ever choose to live there. That was exactly why humanity chose it. In the first year, 5,000 people died. They died from the cold. They died from accidents in the mines. They died from diseases that their limited medicine could not cure. They died from despair, giving up hope and walking out into the storms to end their suffering. But the rest survived. Admiral Laura Bennett, now in her 60s, led the survivors with iron determination. She worked alongside everyone else, digging tunnels into the frozen ground, building shelters from whatever materials they could find. She never asked anyone to do something she would not do herself. When people lost hope, she reminded them why they had to keep going. Every child born here is a victory, she told them. Every day we survive is a defeat for those who tried to kill us. We will not give them the satisfaction of dying. Chief Engineer Maria Santos was the one who made survival possible. She was a small woman with gray hair and hands scarred from decades of work. Before the attack, she had designed starships. Now she designed heating systems that could work without proper parts, water purifiers built from scraps, and shelters that could withstand the terrible storms. Maria never complained. She never stopped working. When someone brought her a broken machine, she fixed it. When someone needed a tool that did not exist, she invented it. The other survivors called her the miracle worker. But Maria just shrugged. Miracles are just problems that haven't been solved yet, she would say. 5 years after the attack, the first underground city was completed. They called it New Hope. It had living quarters for 50,000 people, farms growing food under artificial lights, factories producing basic goods, and schools teaching children who had never seen Earth. Those children were special. They had been born after the attack, in the cold darkness of Heaven 7. They had never seen blue skies or felt warm sunlight on their faces. They knew Earth only from stories told by their parents and grandparents. Stories of green forests and blue oceans. Stories of cities full of life and laughter. Stories of a world that had been taken from them. These children grew up with a fire in their hearts that the older generation recognized but could never fully understand. They did not mourn Earth because they had never known it. Instead, they hated those who had stolen it from them. Their hatred was pure and cold, like the world they had been born on. Captain Kyle Morrison was one of these children. He was born 6 months after the attack, in a temporary shelter that shook with every storm. His mother had been an engineer on the Vanguard. His father had died in the evacuation, staying behind to make sure others could escape. Kyle grew up hearing stories about his father's bravery. He grew up learning everything he could about ships and weapons and tactics. By the time he was 15, he could pilot any craft in the fleet. By the time he was 20, he was training others. Daniel Price, now a senior commander, recognized Kyle's talent immediately. He made Kyle his personal student, teaching him everything he knew about war. "The Council thinks we are broken," Daniel told him. "They think we are scattered and weak. They are not looking for us because they believe we are not a threat. That is their mistake. One day, we will make them pay for that mistake." Kyle listened and learned. He trained every day until his muscles burned and his mind was sharp as a blade. He studied the Council's ships, learning their strengths and weaknesses. He practiced battle simulations until he could defeat any enemy the computer could create. 10 years after the attack, Maria Santos made a discovery that changed everything. A scout ship found the wreckage of a Council destroyer, damaged in the attack and left behind when the fleet withdrew. Maria and her team spent 2 years taking it apart, studying every piece of alien technology. What they found amazed them. The Council's technology was advanced, but it was also old. They had not improved their ships in thousands of years. They had no reason to improve because no one could challenge them. Their weapons were powerful but slow. Their shields were strong but had blind spots. Their tactics were predictable because they had never faced an enemy who could adapt. Maria began to build new ships. She took the best of human engineering and combined it with stolen alien technology. The result was something neither human nor alien had ever seen. Ships that were faster, stronger, and more deadly than anything in the galaxy. 15 years after the attack, the shipyards of Haven 7 produced their first warship. They called it the Retribution. Admiral Laura Bennett, now old and gray but still strong, stood on the bridge of the Retribution and felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. "How many can we build?" she asked Maria. "As many as we need," Maria answered. "We have the plans. We have the materials. We have the workers. Give me 5 more years, and I will give you a fleet." Laura nodded. 5 more years. She was not sure she would live that long, but it did not matter. The work would continue with or without her. The survivors of humanity worked without rest. They built ships in secret factories hidden beneath the ice. They trained soldiers in underground bases. They planned and prepared for the day they would finally strike back. The Council, meanwhile, had forgotten all about them. They had divided Earth's solar system among themselves, stripping its resources and building monuments to their victory. They congratulated themselves on eliminating the human threat. They celebrated their wisdom and foresight. They had no idea what was coming. 20 years after the attack, the human fleet was ready. 500 warships, each one built with 20 years of hatred and pain, and determination. Each one crewed by men and women who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. Admiral Laura Bennett stood before her fleet and gave the order she had dreamed about for 2 decades. "Set course for Council space," she said. "It is time to go home." The fleet moved out of the darkness, out of hiding, out of silence. They moved toward the stars that had once filled them with wonder and now filled them with purpose. The Council had made a mistake 20 years ago. They had tried to kill humanity and failed. Now, they would learn what that failure cost. The first Council outpost to die was called Listening Station 12. It floated at the edge of Council space, a small base with 100 workers who spent their days monitoring the empty darkness beyond their territory. They watched for threats that never came. They had watched for 10,000 years. They never saw the human fleet until it was too late. Lieutenant Emma Gray sat at the tactical station of the Retribution, her fingers moving across the controls with practiced ease. She was 23 years old, born on Haven 7, trained since childhood for this moment. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands were steady. "Target locked," she reported. "Weapons ready." Admiral Laura Bennett stood in the center of the bridge. She was 72 years old now, and her body was failing. Her doctors told her she had only months to live. But she had refused to die before seeing this day. She had held on through sheer willpower, and now she was here. "Fire," she said. The Retribution's main gun spoke with a sound like thunder. Blue-white beams of energy crossed the distance to the listening station in less than a second. The station's shields flickered and died. The hull cracked open like an egg dot in 11 minutes. Listening Station 12 was nothing but floating debris. The human fleet moved on without stopping. They had studied the Council's communication systems. They knew it would take hours for anyone to realize the station was gone. Hours were all they needed. The second target was a mining colony on a small moon. 3,000 Council workers extracted rare metals that were shipped to the core worlds. They had no weapons, no defenses, no reason to fear. The Council had not fought a real war in centuries. Captain Kyle Morrison led the assault. His squadron of 50 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly above the colony. The workers looked up and saw death falling from the sky. The attack lasted 7 minutes. Kyle felt nothing as he watched the colony burn. These were the same species that had killed his father. The same species that had murdered 3 billion of his people. The same species that had stolen his birthright. He had no room in his heart for mercy. Word began to spread through Council space. Something was attacking the outer territories. Something fast and deadly and relentless. The Council sent messages to their military commanders, demanding answers. No one had answers to give. Commander Daniel Price, now in his late 40s, coordinated the attacks from the Retribution's war room. Maps covered the walls, showing Council space in detail. Red dots marked the targets they had already destroyed. Green dots marked the targets still to come. "We need to move faster," he told Admiral Bennett. "The longer we wait, the more time they have to organize a response." Lavra nodded. "Tell all ships to proceed to Phase 2. Hit them everywhere at once. Don't give them time to think." The human fleet split into dozens of smaller groups. Each group had its own targets, its own mission. They spread across Council space like a plague, striking without warning and vanishing before anyone could respond. Councilor Dexari received the reports in his private chambers on the Council's capital world. He read each one with growing disbelief. Mining colonies destroyed. Communication stations silenced. Military outpost was wiped out. Thousands dead in a single week. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly as he tried to understand what was happening. The Council had no enemies. The Council had crushed every threat centuries ago. This was impossible. Then he saw the images captured by a survivor at one of the destroyed outposts. Images of ships he did not recognize, built in a style he had never seen. Ships that moved too fast, hit too hard, and showed no fear. And then he saw the symbol painted on their hulls. A blue circle with green and brown markings. A planet he had ordered, destroyed 20 years ago. Earth. Thack single quotes. Ari felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Fear. He called an emergency meeting of the council. The 12 species that ruled the galaxy gathered in their great hall, surrounded by treasures stolen from 1,000 conquered worlds. They argued and blamed each other and demanded explanations that no one could provide. The humans were destroyed, one counselor insisted. We watched them die. We burned their world. Clearly, some survived, another replied. And now they have returned. Then we will destroy them again, Thexari said, forcing calm into his voice. We have 10,000 ships. They cannot have more than a few hundred. We will crush them like we crushed them before. The council agreed. Orders went out to every military base in their territory. The Great Fleet would gather and hunt down these human survivors once and for all. But while the council debated, the human fleet continued to strike. Ambassador Clara Hughes commanded the diplomatic mission. She was 60 years old, a survivor of the original attack who had lost her entire family in the bombing. Her job was not to fight but to spread a message. Clara's ship visited every species that lived under council rule. These were the conquered races, the species that had surrendered to the council rather than be destroyed. They lived as servants and slaves, their cultures erased, their freedom gone. Clara spoke to them in simple words. The council tried to destroy us, she told them. They failed. Now we are going to destroy them. When we are done, you will be free. Help us, and we will remember. Stand against us, and we will not forget. Some species refused to listen. They had lived under the council for so long that they could not imagine any other way. They reported Clara's visit to their council masters, but others listened. They had their own memories of genocide, their own dead to mourn, their own hatred to feed. They began to whisper among themselves. They began to hope. The human fleet gathered for the final assault. 500 ships, crewed by survivors and their children, armed with weapons forged in hatred and purpose. They gathered at a place called Orion's Gate, the main entrance to Council Core Space. And they waited. Admiral Laura Bennett sent one final message to the council before the battle began. Her face appeared on screens across their capital world. She looked old and tired and sick, but her eyes burned with a fire that made Councilor Dixari's blood run cold. 20 years ago, you tried to end us, Laura said. You killed 3 billion people who had done nothing wrong. You murdered children in their beds. You laughed and called us a threat that had been eliminated. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to a whisper. You were right to be afraid of us. You were just wrong about winning. We are coming for you now. Every one of you. And when we are done, no one will remember that your council ever existed. The transmission ended. The Battle of Orion's Gate began. The council fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel like a storm of metal and fire. 10,000 ships spread across the darkness of space, their weapons charged, their crews confident. They had come to end the human threat once and for all. Admiral Vexnock, the greatest military commander in council history, stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the human fleet with contempt. 500 ships. Only 500. He had expected more. He had hoped for a challenge. All ships advance, he ordered. Standard engagement pattern. Crush them quickly. I want to be home before the celebration feast. His officers laughed. This would not be a battle. This would be an execution. The council fleet moved forward in perfect formation. Their ships were huge, built to intimidate as much as to fight. Golden hulls gleamed in the starlight. Weapons that had burned 100 worlds powered up with a low hum. 10,000 ships against 500. The mathematics were simple. The Council would win. Then the human ships began to move. Lieutenant Commander Nathan Cole led the first assault wing. His squadron of 20 ships accelerated toward the enemy fleet at speeds that should have been impossible. The Council sensors struggled to track them. Their targeting computers could not keep up. Nathan's voice came over the fleet communication channel, calm and clear. Remember what they did. Remember why we are here. Make them pay. His squadron hit the Council formation like a knife through cloth. They wove between the massive alien ships, firing as they went. Their weapons punched through shields that had never faced anything like them. Explosions bloomed across the Council line. Admiral Vexenok stared at his tactical display with disbelief. 6 of his ships were already disabled. How was this possible? These were primitives. These were vermin who should have died 20 years ago. All ships, concentrate fire on those small craft, he commanded. Destroy them. But the human ships were too fast. They dodged and spun and rolled through the Council's fire. They moved like nothing Vexenok had ever seen, like living creatures rather than machines. For every shot that hit, 10 more missed. Chief Tactical Officer Rachel Morrison watched from the bridge of the Retribution. She was Kyle Morrison's older sister, born 3 years before the attack. She remembered Earth. She remembered the day the Council ships came. She remembered the flames. "Admiral," she reported, "the enemy formation is breaking. They're confused. They don't know how to fight us." Admiral Larva Bennett nodded from her command chair. She was too weak to stand now, but her mind was still sharp. She had planned this battle for 20 years. She knew exactly how it would go. "Tell all squadrons to proceed to Phase 2, she ordered. "Time to show them what we really brought." The human fleet changed its tactics. Instead of weaving through the enemy formation, the squadrons regrouped into tight clusters. They formed into shapes that looked almost like spearheads, pointed directly at the Council's largest ships. And then they charged. The Council ships tried to retreat, but they were too slow. The human squadrons punched through their shields and hulls with focused fire. One by one, the great golden ships began to die. Admiral Vexenok watched his fleet crumble around him. Ships that had stood for centuries exploded into fragments. Crews that had trained for decades died in seconds. His perfect formation became chaos, then panic, then rout. "This is impossible," he whispered. "We are the Council. We rule the galaxy. We cannot lose to these primitives." But they were losing. They were dying. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Captain Kyle Morrison led his squadron directly at Vexenok's flagship. He had studied this ship for years, memorized every weakness, every blind spot. He knew exactly where to strike. "Follow my lead," he told his pilots. "Stay tight. Hit them where it hurts." The squadron dove toward the flagship's engine section. Council gunners fired desperately, but the human ships were too small, too fast, too skilled. Kyle's finger tightened on the firing control. "For Earth," he said, and pressed the button. The flagship's engines exploded. The massive ship shuddered, then began to break apart. Admiral Vexenok had just enough time to understand that he had lost before his bridge collapsed around him. The death of the flagship broke whatever courage the Council fleet had left. Ships began to flee in every direction, abandoning their formations, abandoning their commanders, abandoning their duty. The humans hunted them down without mercy. Commander Daniel Price watched the rout from the Retribution's war room. His face showed no emotion. He had dreamed of this moment for 20 years, but now that it was here, he felt only emptiness. Victory would not bring back the dead. Nothing would bring back the dead, but it would make sure they had not died for nothing. The Battle of Orions, Gate lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Council fleet existed only as wreckage floating in the void. 10,000 ships destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of enemy crew dead. The greatest military force in galactic history, wiped out by a species they had tried to exterminate. Admiral Laura Bennett called for a fleet-wide communication. Every ship, every crew member, stopped to listen to her voice. "Today we have won a great victory," she said. Her voice was weak but steady. "But our work is not done. The Council still exists. Their leaders still live. Their worlds still stand. We will not stop until all of that has changed." She paused to cough. Everyone could hear how sick she was. Everyone knew she was dying. "I may not live to see the end of this war," Lavra continued. "But you will. You will see the Council fall. You will see humanity rise from the ashes. You will build a future that our enemies tried to steal from us. And when you do, remember this day. Remember that we won because we refused to give up. We won because we were willing to pay any price. We won because they made us into something they should have feared." She smiled then, a thin and tired smile. "Now let's finish what we started." The human fleet regrouped. They had lost 40 ships in the battle, a fraction of what the Council had lost. They were wounded but not broken. They were tired but not finished. The path to the Council's capital world lay open before them, and nothing in the galaxy could stop them from taking it. The Council's capital world was called Nexus Prime. It was the oldest inhabited planet in the galaxy, home to a civilization that had existed for 100,000 years. Towers of crystal and gold rose miles into the sky. Gardens of impossible beauty covered entire continents. Treasures from 1,000 conquered species filled museums larger than cities. The Council had built Nexus Prime to show their power. Every alien species that visited was meant to feel small and weak compared to the beings who ruled here. For 50,000 years, that plan had worked perfectly. Now, human ships filled the sky above it. Admiral Laura Bennett sat in her command chair for the last time. The doctors had told her she had hours left at most. Her body was shutting down, organ by organ. But she had held on this long, and she would hold on a little longer. She would see this through to the end. "All ships report ready, Admiral," Commander Daniel Price told her. "We have complete orbital control. The Council has no military assets left in this system." Laura nodded slowly. "And the civilian population?" "Approximately 12 billion on the planet. Another 4 billion on orbital stations and nearby moons. 12 billion people." Lavra thought about that number. It was almost exactly how many humans had existed before the Council's attack. Earth had held 8 billion. The colonies had held another 4 billion. 12 billion lives, reduced to a few 100 million survivors hiding in the darkness. She felt nothing. She had used up all her feelings long ago. "Open a channel to the surface," she ordered. "Let them see who has come for them." The transmission went out to every screen on Nexus Prime. In homes and offices, in markets and temples, in the great halls where the Council had ruled for millennia, the face of a dying human woman appeared. "My name is Lavra Bennett," she said. 20 years ago, your Council murdered my world. They killed 3 billion people in 3 days. They destroyed everything I loved. They did this because they were afraid of what we might become." She paused to gather her strength. They were right to be afraid, but they were wrong to leave survivors. On the planet below, Councilor Dexari watched the transmission with his 4 eyes wide with terror. He had tried to flee, but the human ships had blocked every escape route. He had tried to negotiate, but the humans refused to answer his messages. He had tried to surrender, but they did not want his surrender. They wanted something else entirely. "You cannot do this," he whispered to the screen. "This is genocide. You have become no better than us. As if she could hear him, Laura continued speaking. Some of you might think this is wrong. Some of you might call us monsters for what we are about to do. But we did not start this war. We came to you with open hands, wanting only friendship. You answered with fire and death. You taught us that mercy is weakness. You taught us that the only way to be safe is to leave no enemy alive. Her voice hardened. We learned your lesson well. She cut the transmission and turned to her tactical officer. Lieutenant Gray, you may begin the bombardment. Emma Gray hesitated for just a moment. She was about to kill 12 billion people. 12 billion lives wiped out on her command. She thought of her parents, who had died in the attack on Earth. She thought of her grandparents, who had never stopped crying for the world they had lost. She thought of the children of Haven 7, born in darkness and cold, who would never know the warmth of a real sun. Yes, Admiral, she said, and pressed the command. The human fleet opened fire. Captain Kyle Morrison watched from his ship as the first projectiles fell toward Nexus Prime. They were not energy weapons. They were kinetic impactors, massive chunks of metal accelerated to tremendous speeds. They would hit the planet's surface with the force of nuclear explosions, but without the radiation. Clean, efficient, final. The first impacts struck the great cities. Towers that had stood for 100,000 years crumbled into dust. Gardens that had bloomed for millennia burned to ash. Museums filled with the treasures of conquered species were erased from existence. Kyle felt his sister Rachel put her hand on his shoulder. Are you all right? She asked. He thought about the question. Was he all right? He had just helped kill billions of people. He had participated in the greatest act of destruction in galactic history. How could anyone be all right after that? But then he thought of his father, who had died saving others during the evacuation. He thought of his mother, who had worked herself to death building ships on Haven 7. He thought of every human who had suffered and died because of the Council's fear. No, he said honestly, but I think I will be, someday. The bombardment continued for 3 days. The same amount of time the Council had spent burning Earth. When it was over, Nexus Prime was a dead world. Its atmosphere was choked with dust and ash. Its surface was covered with craters. Its population was gone. The Council was gone. Admiral Laura Bennett died on the 3rd day, just as the last impacts fell. She passed quietly in her sleep, surrounded by the people she had led through 2 decades of darkness. Her last words were a whisper that only Daniel Price heard. We won, she said. Tell them we won. Daniel held her hand as she slipped away. Then he stood up and walked to the bridge. The crew looked at him with grief and exhaustion and something that might have been hope. The Admiral is gone, he told them. But her work is finished. The Council is destroyed. We are free. Ambassador Clara Hughes sent the final message to every species in the galaxy. She told them what humanity had done and why. She told them that the Council's rule was over. She told them they were free to govern themselves, to rebuild their cultures, to live without fear. We do not want to rule you, Claire said. We do not want to be what the Council was. We only want to be left in peace. But if anyone threatens us again, if anyone tries to finish what the Council started, they will share the Council's fate. Remember that. The human fleet turned away from the ruins of Nexus Prime. They headed back toward their own space, toward the solar system that had once been their home. Earth was still there, scarred and wounded but not dead. Life had begun to return to its surface. Green things grew in the ashes of the old cities. Humanity would rebuild. It would take generations, maybe centuries, but they would rebuild. They would make Earth beautiful again. They would spread across the stars, not as conquerors, but as survivors who had earned their place in the galaxy. Captain Kyle Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and looked out at the stars. They seemed different now, brighter, more welcoming. The darkness that had haunted his people for 20 years was finally lifting. What happens now? Emigre asked him. Kyle thought about the question. He thought about everything they had been through, everything they had done, everything they had lost. And he thought about everything that lay ahead. Now, he said, we live. We grow. We remember the dead, but we don't let their deaths define us. We become something better than what we were, something better than what our enemies feared we would be. He turned to face his crew. The war is over. Our survival is no longer in question. But what we do with that survival, what kind of species we choose to be, that is up to us. I hope we choose wisely. The fleet entered faster than light travel, leaving the ruins of the old galactic order behind. They were going home. Humanity had won. They had erased their enemies from existence. They had paid for their survival with rivers of blood. Now, they had to figure out if the price had been worth it. Only time would tell.